My name is Tanya Amade, and I'm the program manager on the business development team at Liberty Company. And I'm honored to introduce to you our speakers for today, who are Tony McIntosh, Dan Law, and Michael Ferris. Tony?
Thank you, Tanya, and thank you everyone for joining us today to discuss the cyber landscape and what that may hold for us this year in 2022. Joining us today, we have Dan Law, Vice President with Cowbell Cyber, one of today's leading cyber insurance carriers, and Michael Ferris, CEO of Abacode, a leading cyber defense and security company. I'm your moderator, Tony McIntosh, managing partner here with the Liberty Company, and it's a pleasure to be with you. Now, being a few months into this new year, right now is really the perfect time to evaluate if you're doing enough to bring awareness to the threats your business is facing. With growing concerns about cybersecurity reaching new heights, I don't think it's a shock that businesses everywhere are taking a look at how safe they are against these threats. And I'd be willing to bet that probably over 90% of us on this webinar have experienced some kind of cyber threat. An odd email request from a colleague, a magical inheritance offshore in Africa, or a password reset email out of nowhere. Some of the cyber goodies that we're going to cover today include facts about cyber insurance, some top industries associated with cyber claims, helpful carrier insights from Cowbell, and from Abacode, we're going to learn about some valuable levers that you can pull down on and activate for better cybersecurity. So as we get started here, let's set the table right with some facts about cyber. In many ways, cyber risk is its own pandemic, right? I mean, ransomware has quickly become the predominant strain. Some reports have estimated that volumes of attacks alone have increased anywhere from 200 to 300% in 2021. And that will likely double again as we look forward. And unfortunately for many of us, the majority of cyber events are directed at small to mid-sized businesses. Now, cyber criminals are also shifting to more advanced techniques in an effort to maximize their returns. In addition to leveraging AI or artificial intelligence, they're also deploying supply chain attacks. You can think of it this way. Hackers covertly install malicious code into a software update, which is then installed by a large number of its users, effectively breaching numerous victims. So when we think about it, of course, small and mid-sized businesses are victims more, right? Because cyber criminals are spending more than these companies typically are with their entire IT budgets. So the demands themselves are growing, and in many ways, they're growing exponentially. Many experts are citing that a ransom increase has increased over 50 to 80%, with remediation costs also doubling to $2 million, up from an average of $761,000 just 2 years ago. Think about that. These increases can be attributed to the surging value of Bitcoin, the increasing willingness of victims to pay, and then advances in intrusion techniques, right, with the growing market of cybercrime in general. So many companies can be hacked with ease as a result of outdated or unpatched software, poor password hygiene, open web ports, unencrypted data in transit, and a lack of endpoint protection. And you don't have to be a target to be affected. Cyber attacks can spread through your suppliers or your outsourced technology providers, leading to significant impacts even when you aren't the target. So many carriers and cyber defense firms have seen significant collateral damage from cyber incidents originating at separate companies. Right, Michael? Right, Dan?
That's right. Hey, to jump in real quick, Tony.
Sure.
One of those techniques with a remote workforce is remote desktop protocol, which effectively says if you work from home, this is how I access files and folders. So we're seeing attacks, 2 out of 3 attacks coming from that remote desktop protocol, and a third of those coming from phishing, emails, which most people are familiar with. So the remote workers definitely seen an increase in breaches.
Right, and with today's world, that's exactly where everything's going, right? So I think the question becomes, What if your data storage provider is the target of a cyber attack and your data is compromised in the process? Are you prepared? That's a very good question to ask yourself as you're thinking about your cybersecurity defense. So as Michael was alluding to, the combination of COVID lockdowns, the increase in remote work arrangements, the mass resignations, and the resulting labor shortage is also providing an ideal environment for these ransomware attacks. With employees working at home, they may be distracted or disregarding security protocols. New employees are often poorly trained, and the labor shortage is causing many employees, as we all know, to become stressed and overworked. So all of these situations, as Michael was alluding to, decrease employee awareness, resulting in an increased likelihood of being breached. And despite all of that, less than 3% of small to mid-sized businesses have cyber insurance. That's a staggering number. Dan, what have you seen in terms of the number of insureds that are just now buying cyber insurance relative to renewals?
We do see quite a bit of first-time buyers entering the cyber marketplace, and we're not alone or unique in that regard. All of our competitors in the space, the volume of submissions, the volume of inquiries coming in is significantly picking up. Month over month numbers continue to grow pretty exponentially in terms of businesses wanting some assessment done, wanting to know what coverage would look like, where they're deficient in their protections to get a quote from us. So the awareness is certainly growing. I think that speaks a lot to what you folks are doing on the brokerage side, but also just general awareness in the news media about the events that are taking place out there.
Right. And so, cyber insurance is important because of the obvious, in my opinion. Cyber insurance is important because it provides affirmative protection. Traditional insurance policies may be inadequate to respond to cyber exposures. A cyber policy is specifically designed to address these gaps and give you the affirmative protection against exposures that can really be difficult to understand. Cyber insurance is a complement to existing IT teams, supplementing their skills and protecting the business from the unknown. Michael, how do you engage IT teams when you're working at deploying some of the levers that your clients pull down on in conjunction with some of what the cyber insurance carrier has brought forward in terms of vulnerabilities or patchwork that's needed to take place?
Yeah, we really help IT leadership inside an organization address kind of two areas. One, it's the how do I implement these technologies, services, and controls that are required to meet the application or the new liability policy? And then how do I effectively communicate our need for this to my C-suite, right, to the CEO and the CFO? So that's what we spend a lot of time doing, is more of the business discussion around cyber compliance and insurance. Not only we transfer kind of the technical discussion into a business discussion that can be relayed to the C-suite.
Exactly. Michael, just to touch base on that point, I'm sure you would agree. We used to get a lot of questions about, if I implement X, Y, and Z, what will my discount look like on my cyber insurance policy? And that's really not the name of the game anymore. And I'm sure you're seeing that as well. These are barriers to entry to even getting coverage. Some of the tools and implementations that you would be handling on your side of the fence. So
yeah, 100%. And not only is it just, these are table stakes to do business on a go forward, but really companies should think about it as an offensive weapon, right? If I now have cyber liability insurance and I implement a cybersecurity and compliance program, I now can market that and use it, in my sales, collateral material. We have seen clients who have been proactive in doing this, getting both of those components on board, have an increase in revenue. So, and use it as a, offensive, like I said, or a marketing component.
All very good points. And the top 5, industries targeted these days by cyber criminals include some of the obvious, right? Professional services, manufacturing, retail, healthcare, financial services. And And let's talk about some of the common claims that arise with these industries that we're seeing out there. Now, cybercrime, hacktivism, sophisticated attackers, they're all carrying out espionage on behalf of the beneficiary. And these are just some of the risks to consider, right? We've got vulnerabilities to cyber events that can be really high, as many financial institutions are dependent on highly interconnected networks and critical infrastructures. With a high dependency on technology, most financial institutions will continue to see increased exposure to cyber risk. The digitization of medical records has resulted in an increased reliance on healthcare companies, on computer systems to collect and transact highly sensitive personal health and medical data. There is a high exposure to administrative errors due to the reliance on employees to input accurate information into systems. Legacy computer systems at healthcare companies are often unsegregated, which increases the potential that one event could have severe impact on operations. Whether online or brick and mortar, retail companies often have many locations that may or may not operate on centralized IT systems. They often have a reliance on complicated network or critical IT service providers with the potential dependency on websites due to the increasing number of online sales and aggregated amount of sensitive personal information due to the high frequency of financial transactions and loyalty programs. With the amount of confidential data collected, the professional services sector is a popular target for cyber attacks, as you can imagine. For example, the information and funds a law firm or an accountant holds can be lucrative for an attacker, and the reputational consequences for a firm, suffering a breach can be highly damaging. The aggregation of sensitive client information has fueled an increase in cyber events impacting professional service firms in the recent years. Many manufacturers are leveraging the Internet of Things, IoT, digitalization, and cloud services, which all increase the impact of certain cyber events. There's been recent events impacting industrial control systems and supervisory control and data acquisition systems, which have had crippling effects on some of these manufacturing operations. The hospitality sector covers a wide range of operations from hotels to bars and restaurants. Across that industry, cyber-related exposures include large volumes of consumer and employee information, on often heavy reliance on websites for customer bookings and loyalty program information that can lead to privacy issues, as it can be a target of social engineering and phishing attacks. Media and entertainment companies often face cyber extortion threats and maybe that could be a target to sensitive material and content. Distributed denial of service attacks or computer system outages may significantly impact broadcasting activities and the timely content delivery of those. The possession of sensitive personal information of subscribers compounds this exposure. Educational establishments are at risk due to sensitive data that they hold on students and staff. Schools and universities have limited IT budgets and resources, so threats are both external and internal, whether it's from a student introducing malware into their network, either maliciously or inadvertently, or a staff member not following protocol leading to a data breach. Technology companies are trusted by their clients and customers to be industry leaders in cybersecurity and the protection of data. So they have an increasing risk of reputational damage that could follow a cyber event. Cyber events experienced by technology providers can also have an impact on their tech E&O coverage. So as cybercrime becomes more common and costly, cyber risk continues to increase for all organizations. The pandemic has shifted more of our work and lives online, as we've discussed, and this shift has introduced new vulnerabilities that are being aggressively exploited. Cyber insurance and proper cybersecurity play a key role in managing and reducing cyber risk. The framework that is built is extremely important, and as part of that foundation should be your cyber insurance carrier. Now, cyber goes far beyond traditional insurance by providing technology and expert support before, during, and after an incident occurs. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to my friend Dan Law with Cowbell Cyber to discuss their cyber assessments and the type of insights you can gain working with your carrier partner.
Thank you, Tony. I appreciate that. And really that framework that you just laid out speaks very well to sort of our approach in the marketplace to how we're looking at the cyber insurance and assessing the risk of those businesses that we're choosing to insure or choosing to not insure. So our approach really is that of a closed loop risk management take on cyber insurance. So initial assessments conducted, we'll walk through that a bit and what that looks like. That drives the insurance product and the customization that somebody in Tony's seat can come up with for a particular business. Not all of them are created equal. You know, manufacturing business that has downtime will run into specific business interruption concerns that maybe another business may not face. And maybe it's a reputational risk for the law firm, whereas downtime might not be as important to them. So we look at the assessment, we look at the insurance coverage that we drive, and then we're really focused on this idea where Michael and his team can play a role as well on the improvement of that cybersecurity posture. So when we think about cybersecurity, we look at the NIST cybersecurity framework and try to provide resources and support for our clients, our broker, our technology partners throughout that life cycle there. So as we step to the next slide and really look at that initial assessment that we're conducting, folks like Cowbell in the background today, we are looking at the cyber risk of some 22 million organizations throughout the United States, largely focused on small and medium-sized enterprises. So those businesses up to 250 million in revenue. And we are pinging firewalls. We're running outside-in scanning on those organizations. We look at about 1,000 risk signals and data points in the background continuously on those businesses. So we are assessing your network security, your cloud security posture, your likelihood of cyber extortion events. And then we are comparing those scores. We drive it to an industry aggregate score and then a specific company aggregate score. So what we are doing is within our framework, within our understanding of cyber risks, and it evolves continuously, it evolves every day, every month, with the changing threat actors, the changing threat landscape, different attack vectors. We're able to apply all of that knowledge to our assessment on the front end when a business is brought to us to assess, and then drive that information further back to the insurance product and what we can provide to the insured in terms of resources and closing that loop there. So if we step to the next slide. What our connectors that we've built within our technology framework really allow for a deeper assessment. You know, we're looking at security practices applied to cloud applications and email services. These really speak to some of those avenues that Tony talked about, how people are getting into organizations. Is MFA applied everywhere? You're going to hear that whatever application you're completing for cyber insurance is going to include those questions these days. And really not just is it enabled, but where is MFA enabled? Is it on mission critical systems? Is it on your cloud deployments? Is it within your email framework? Data in the cloud and exposed on the internet without protection, vulnerabilities and patch management, all of those sorts of things. So we've built connectors, as we call them, with various technology platforms to further drive assessment and understanding of your cybersecurity posture of a particular organization, all within the framework of driving resources back to the insured, back to the broker, back to your technology vendors to improve upon your cyber resiliency and the posture that you've got there. I'm sure, Michael, you would agree, you know, one of the things that we drive to a lot of our clients is the cyber awareness training. I'm sure you would agree that that's an important aspect of anybody's security posture, seeing that a lot of attacks are, you know, human error based.
100%. Yeah, it's still one of the largest threat vectors is the employee. But that you listed, you know, MFA, multi-factor authentication, critical must have. We see one of the biggest reasons or hackers get a hold is these unpatched systems. And so, yeah, everything you're listing is just right on.
Yeah, it's really an interesting time in the market. I was going to call it a neat time in the market, but it's an interesting time in the market where there is, I've never seen more alignment between people in three distinctly different chairs, like myself, Michael, and Tony, and everybody trying to drive toward that same result with the insured. You know, there's an understanding of the threats. There's an understanding of some of the technology practices that can be brought to bear, what carriers are really looking at, how they're assessing the risk, and all wrapped up in sort of driving resources and resiliency back to the insured to hopefully prevent attacks and prevent them from being shut down. You know, that day you get a claim reported is basically the worst day for an organization out there. You know, much more impactful typically than any work comp claim or property claim that they may have in the life of their organization.
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point, Dan. I think there's a lot of misnomers out there in terms of, well, I don't need cyber insurance. My credit card processing company told me that I'm good, as an example. You know, these webinars are so important in driving edification and education to our clients and prospects and just the population in general. And to your point, you know, pulling together the three components that are really critical to a framework and having that alignment on your team, you know, provides you with an advantage in the marketplace.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree too. And I mean, we preach, you know, having cyber liability insurance, you know, to everyone we speak with. And I think there's still a bit of a mindset out there with, will it happen to me, especially for the small to medium enterprise? What data do I have and will it actually happen to me? And we can tell you, yeah, it's definitely not an if, it is a when. A small part of our business is digital forensics and incident response. Someone had ransomware, we come in and help them out. And most of those companies were doing things right inside of their company. They just weren't doing the right thing. So having that policy is just, it's a must.
And the training, to your point, Michael, that you brought up, I mean, that's really critical. We get emails monthly in terms of the amount of training that we have to do in cyber and the awareness that's really critical to your staff, because that's where your vulnerabilities are. I mean, yes, they're in the obvious in terms of, you know, outdated software, and you can provide solutions there. But then your biggest vulnerability is within your staff, right? Is within your teams. The human error component is what drives a lot of the claim activity that you see out there.
Yeah,
absolutely, absolutely. If you want, great. On the you know, the assessment, the intake of data, the ingestion of that, the understanding of what risks a business faces, the threat actors, the threat vectors that we see, our outside-in scanning, then the scanning behind the firewall with our connectors that we're able to conduct. All of it is done within the framework of driving insights and intelligence back to our clients to help them resolve issues that we've uncovered, help them get an understanding of how we're seeing their cybersecurity framework and how they can adjust things to improve upon their scoring for us, but ultimately the protection and resiliency that they're providing to their organization. So we drive a lot of understanding about you know, our insights and intelligence, step-by-step instructions that an insured can take to improve upon that resiliency and trying to close that loop to the best of our ability for our clients, which we think is really important and a service that we are, you know, really eager to provide to our insureds out there in the marketplace. You know, a lot of small and medium-sized businesses, they are the source of attacks by sophisticated ransomware gangs, and it's because there are not significant IT budgets. It's because there are not, you know, a CISO on staff in a lot of these organizations that has their finger on the pulse of the IT framework, has that 24/7 monitoring in place, unless you're getting it from an outside firm like Michael would provide. So we think it's really important to provide those insights and recommendations and clear steps that somebody could take to check boxes to improve their framework a bit.
That's a really good point, Dan. I know that with some of our clients that we have insured with Cowbell, we've seen these reports come back. We've seen your team activate education around, hey, this is what we're seeing. Here's what we need done prior to us coming online or, initiating the policy, effectuating the policy. And I've seen it in real time where the IT department comes in and goes, wow, we had no idea that we were vulnerable. We thought we were good to go based on our understanding. This is great information. This is great insight to be able to provide a better framework, for that company. And it worked its weight in gold, it seemed like. So good stuff.
So, just to touch base on sort of the same things that Tony and we've been talking about here, 85% of breaches involve a human element. And that's sort of by design. The threat actors are out there for small and medium-sized businesses. They're throwing spaghetti against a wall to see what's going to stick. And eventually somebody, John Doe within the organization is going to click on that link that's going to let somebody into that environment. It's important to know, as Tony alluded to earlier, that the budgets of these folks, these ransomware gangs, these are businesses where people are paid a salary to spend day and night focused on infiltrating your business, and specifically on those industries that Tony alluded to earlier. A lot of those organizations cannot have downtime. I don't know many manufacturing businesses that run lean and can simply run another shift if they needed to make the widgets that they're trying to make. Most of them are already running at full capacity, which is why the ransomware gangs attack them, because they know it can be a quick payment to get the systems back online. Same thing for law firms with the critical data that they have, insider information on businesses, potential mergers and acquisitions, things of that. They're a significant source of attacks simply because of the data they have and what it can be used for with the ransomware, the threat actors. So, we continue to see the frequency, the severity increase across market segments. Ransomware really is sort of an epidemic. Appeared in 10% of incidents in 2021, which was double from the prior year. A lot of this data is a little bit tough to come by and relies on public reporting of information, which we know is not very robust. There's not a significant framework for mandated reporting, although we do see some of that coming from the federal level for particular industries and utilities, government agencies, federal contractors, and things like that. That should provide yet further details on the threat landscape. But really, it tells a story of where rates and coverage elements and things like that have headed over the past 18 months, and where we think they're going to continue to head in the future.
And I got a question for you, Dan and Michael. Since the activity that's been going on in Ukraine, have we seen an uptick in potential breaches or some kind of compromising of the system that you guys have come across within your subsets of clients where they've been reporting to you, hey, we're seeing an uptick in activity, or you guys are seeing an uptick in activity as a result of what's happened?
So I could take that one first. We've got an increased awareness and definitely monitoring and information we've been pushing out to sort of 5 industry segments that have been identified as sort of potential attack vectors for, you're looking with the conflict potentially creating sort of a government mandate. So we would expect those financial institutions, those utility providers, cities, state and local government and things like that to be really the source of attacks there. When you've got ransomware gangs trying to make a point, trying to retaliate for something. So we've got sort of a heightened sense of alert there. I don't believe that we've seen an increase in attacks as of yet, but some of these things have a bit of a longer tail on them. We don't necessarily see them on day one.
Right.
Systems get infiltrated and can rear their head, 6 months down the pipeline.
Sure.
Yeah, and we're seeing increase in activity for sure. We have 2 security operations centers. Those are 24/7. So we're tracking real-time hackers all over the world. We can literally see shift changes, right? See them do a shift change. And we've seen increased activity. And then you have kind of the macro economics happening where I'm sure a lot of your clients are in growth mode. So we're also seeing a lot of breaches and events happen during M&A transaction, raising of capital, things like that. And so hackers are aware of that activity, right? And during those events, that's where we see companies being very vulnerable.
That brings up, a good point. The cyber insurance market continues to be challenging, as Dan alluded to, largely due to rapidly increasing losses. So insurers are really reevaluating, their books of business. I'm sure you're doing the same thing, Dan, on your end. But first time, from our perspective, first time cyber insurance buyers are being highly scrutinized by the markets. Because of all those aforementioned components that are necessary, MFA, endpoint protection, et cetera. And with respect to renewals, in some cases, some insureds are being non-renewed due to a lack of fundamental cybersecurity loss controls, as you're mentioning, Michael. And so, not implementing those controls have significant impacts to coverage or renewal economics. And in general, some of these renewals that we've seen face reductions in limit capacity, increased retentions, imposed sublimits for certain exposures, coverage restrictions, or premiums that have doubled or tripled that really materially exceed budgets, right? And what those expectations are. So this is a good segue. Let's discuss some of the ways to mitigate these by installing a better framework. With that, I'm going to introduce Michael Ferris, as you've heard already speak, CEO of Abacode, leading cyber defense firm here in the US, to talk about some of the cybersecurity and compliance mechanisms that they can deploy.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. So we're really in the business of, outside of the cyber liability policy and the assessment component, we're the group helping companies implement and manage a full cybersecurity and compliance program. And you'll see this, unified cybersecurity and compliance message that we put out there. And the reason we did that is because you can be secure and not compliant, and compliant and not secure. And speaking of that, like the prior liability policies that were put out there, everyone knows that the renewal is coming up. The controls and the requirements inside of that application are increasing, and a big part of that is that companies either weren't doing those things, implementing those things, or it really just wasn't enough. So that's why we always talk about cybersecurity and compliance unification in the same manner, because this is really where clients need to be. We're a global firm. We have insight to threat vectors, threat actors, compliance activity all over the world. We've really built out, by the request of our clients, a full cybersecurity and compliance program that consists of things like 24/7 monitoring, cybersecurity awareness training, vulnerability assessments, and compliance readiness. So outside of the cyber liability policy, which has certain requirements, and a lot of those requirements follow this NIST framework, which is a great standard framework. A lot of your clients, you'll have to understand, are having to meet multiple other standards. So if you're in the DoD supply chain, you may have to meet CMMC. If you're a software development company or you have a SaaS product, you'll probably have to be SOC 2 compliant. A lot of manufacturers are ISO 9001 or 27001. If you're in California, you have to meet the CCPA, right? That regional requirement. So they're dealing with the liability part of it, that policy, but also other factors. And so, so we can help on both sides, but it's good to understand that they're facing, this compliance from many different areas. And then with us, we collaborate, Dan, Tony, groups like this, legal, regulatory compliant audit certification firms. It's really good to understand the ecosystem that surrounds why companies have to make these decisions and the players involved, which is good. In addition to that, we stood up a cyber applied research lab we call Carl. And this is where we'll regularly bring in a lot of these cybersecurity and compliance products, these software products and platforms, and we'll understand them, we'll train on them, we'll get certified. And that way, when we're speaking with a client, they're always thinking about, well, what are these technologies and how many of them are there and how do they compete? They can have a business discussion and make business decisions around implementing new technologies inside of their stack or their program that make financial sense and business sense based on the industry they are in or their financial budget. And that's the smart way, to go about it. And then us, we like to say we eat our own dog food. So we not only help companies become compliant, but we meet those same standards as well, like being SOC 2, ISO 27001, and so forth. Next slide. We feel it's important. I think, what Dan and Tony have been speaking about is really how do we have a business discussion with leadership, right, to address all these challenges. So for us, that's first and foremost. We were really born out of the boardroom, we like to say. But it's important to know how the CEO and the board is thinking. Like, what are their topics of concern? And for a CEO and a board, a lot of times it is governance and compliance. Like, how do I implement the right checks and balances between IT and security, which there should be. There should be some separation of duties. There should be that tax and audit, component. What's my real, exposure? What additional compliance standards should I face? It's good to understand how the CFO is thinking in finance, right? They're about cost, but they really don't have enough visibility today to make those financials decisions. So when they're looking at a liability policy or implementing security controls, it's really, how do you give them the awareness, visibility, KPIs, metrics, and ROI on that spend? Because that's what they need to know. If I spend X, what happens with Y? And if I spend more, do I get more? And so it's important to understand how that group's thinking. And then, the CIO and IT management, what they're dealing with out there, we're seeing just every day is the complexity and confusion. One part of that is for every one of these controls that they need to fix to meet that policy, right? There are 38 products that do the same thing that say they're the best in the world. And so there's hundreds and hundreds of different products and technologies that are used in meeting these controls, and it's confusing. They don't have enough resources, knowledge, time to be able to do that. And that's one thing that we help with is being able to evaluate that. But they're just dealing with that, that white noise, which makes it hard for them to, make decisions. Next slide. So we've touched on, these external forces driving compliance requirements and cybersecurity requirements. Obviously, the renewal component is huge. On the renewal side of it, what does that landscape look like a little bit further, and what conversations are you having specific to the increase in the controls, right? Because the prior policy in this new renewal application is different. And I'd love to hear what are some of the conversations you're having with your clients on that increase in controls and what they're saying. Dan,
Dan, is that for you, buddy?
Yeah, it might be. I mean, what we're trying to do on our side is really get out in front of it and far in advance if possible, and engage with our insureds, with our brokers, to explain sort of what we may be looking at, what the landscape might look like, to sort of prepare them for those conversations. And we're seeing a very strong willingness from our insureds to engage in that process, which is created by the awareness that the brokers, the technology partners are all creating there. So, really a willingness to get engaged early on, figure out what it looks like, what steps need to be taken, what was maybe deficient last year, or the table stakes that will be applied to something this year at renewal. We're committed ourselves to, renewing what we've got on the books when it makes sense to do so, outside of, some significant changes to maybe a business operation or what it might be. But we're looking to provide that guidance. We've got those insights and the recommendations really at our fingertips and ready to apply. So, a willingness from the client to engage on that stuff is super helpful for us in assessing and evaluating terms to put on the table for a renewal.
Yeah, and I'd say from my perspective, it's challenging when an insured is not as proactive as they should be in these areas, meaning they're trying to obtain cyber insurance, but they don't have MFA or endpoint protection as an example. And then they're trying to go through this mad dash of how do I install that right now and make that work so that way I can get that particular proposal or premium that seems to be more in line with my budget. However, that particular carrier is extending that premium because they assume that I have a well-established framework and security measures that meet their marks. And for us, it's more advantageous for our clients that have been more proactive in their approach to a proper framework and trying to better understand cyber, better understand the impacts that this can have to their business, and then just the very simple things to put in place, quite honestly, to make sure that renewals aren't as challenging, and then being engaged with a security vendor much like Abacode to help drive awareness, help drive more proactive approaches towards their cybersecurity framework and mindset has been more advantageous than the counter, where they're more reactive as a result of not being able to obtain the kind of terms that their expectations had.
Yeah, and that's why
I was going to say, with going with our approach to really assisting and engaging with insureds, we've taken it a step to build we call it the Cowbell Risk Exchange, where we've vetted some of these technology partners, some of these providers, some of these folks that can engage with insureds. So when we identify those deficiencies, we've got a nice smooth handoff, somebody for Tony to engage with that particular insured to say, you don't have this, you can't get that, but here's a solution that we can provide to you. Here's somebody that can get in here and knows exactly what they're looking for, industry specific, solution specific folks that we've engaged with. Again, just around driving resources, driving efficiencies, and driving that cyber resiliency to the insured.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Dan, because what you and Tony mentioned before about the collaboration between groups like ours has never been in more lockstep. It's because of that, because we all know the new policies coming up, right, are going to have increased controls. So the back end of that is when that insured or potential insured gets that, and then they get with their risk or their IT teams. A lot of times they just don't have the time or the people to be able to implement, right? So that's that bottleneck. And so we built a business on solving that bottleneck, right? Because we can implement and manage the entire thing, all of the controls. And so that's why this is a closed loop, and it's so important that everyone works together. But that's what we're seeing, especially on the renewal side. And this is part of the reason we've created a new category. We call it Managed Cybersecurity and Compliance Provider, or MCCP. And this is really what I spoke about before, is unifying security and compliance, because compliance when it comes to cybersecurity is a little bit broad, right? You have the insurance compliance component, but then you have all these other regulatory compliance components. And we feel similar to what Europe has done, is they have something called GDPR, where it's every company, no matter what your size, industry, sector, how many employees, you are required to meet a minimum level of cybersecurity maturity, or they will fine you. And it's a big number. We don't have that yet. We have it mainly by industries or geography right now, but it is absolutely coming. So our goal was really to unify those two things and come up with MCCP. And then next slide really gives you kind of an outline of what we call MCCP core, because most companies are taking just a product driven or patchwork approach to security and/or compliance. And really our thoughts is it's more of a programmatic approach. How do I implement a program mapped to a compliance standard inside of a maturity model with consolidated reporting, right? And then how do you implement that program and that not only gives what the IT and the risk folks require, but it also speaks to and provides the non-technical C-suite what they require. And that's really our opinion, and what we're seeing in the industry, being adopted more, is a little bit of the consolidation of suppliers, because it's overwhelming and more of a programmatic approach. Next slide. And I'll briefly go through this. So again, we have two, security operations centers. These are, analysts who look at and monitor, software and activity inside of systems 24 hours, 7 days a week. We're looking at, threat, actors and vectors all the time, every day. It's kind of the fundamental, core component of our cybersecurity and compliance. All those components drive into is this, 24/7 security operations center. Next slide. And then it's important for us on the technical side to collaborate with the IT providers. So kind of the SOC NOC model. And so a network operations center is kind of the health of your environment, uptime, things like that. The security operations center is more the immune system and the security of the environment, but it has that, that check balance component to it. And then for us, like, Dan mentioned on this, continuous assessment piece, we feel the highest, bar, or really where everybody should be trying to achieve, is a continuous state of security and compliance, and be able to prove it, right? Real time, anytime. That way, if an insurance provider, a financial partner, a law firm, somebody, a regulatory compliance standard says, show me how mature are you, where you're meeting that, standard or that policy, that you can show them in real time. So we have a portal that, effectively allows them to prove it, but be in a continuous state of security and compliance. Next slide.
All right, so what we've done is provided you with what we feel is a pretty active cyber framework. And cyber frameworks are going to be specific to each business. You need to have a broker, one in particular that loves cyber insurance. Liberty happens to love cyber insurance. You need a good carrier. Carrier is very important. You got to have resources to be able to pull down on and activate. Cowbell is one of the best out there. And you need a good vendor. You need a good vendor partner that understands your business, can provide you with the solutions that make sense. And Abacode is a barrier of defense. So we'd like to thank our audience for taking the time to learn about the cyber world as we continue our journey into 2022. Every business has a different cyber insurance and security need. We hope that we've provided you with some insights to properly build a cyber framework that you consider appropriate. With that, I'd like to open it up for any Q&A that may arise.
Great. Thank you so much, Tony, Michael, and Dan, for sharing this extremely valuable cyber knowledge with us today. We do have a few questions from our audience that I would like to present to you all. Tony, this one's for you. I think you touched on this at the beginning of the presentation, but it would be great if you could reiterate what industry segments are suffering the most from cyber threats and data breaches.
That's a good one. I'll also pull on Dan for that one, but some difficult classes to insure right now include healthcare, real estate, collection agencies, title, escrow, municipalities, as Dan mentioned, schools, MSPs, so managed service providers, utilities, law firms, technology companies, game developers and distributors as well. and then any kind of risk that has a high number of PII or PHI records. Dan, what else could you provide in context to that question?
I would add some carriers having difficulties with manufacturing risks, which was one of the ones you noted in the slide deck there, but didn't just highlight. So again, it's really the ransomware and the downtime risk as it relates to business interruption, which is often a component of a cyber risk policy and really should be included in any robust cyber policy there. So it's important to think about these industries not just in relation to data theft and personal records, but it's really that loss of income in the event that their systems are hijacked and shut down. So the extortion threat that comes along with that, the payment of ransom, that's a portion of it. But the forensic costs to get back in, the downtime and the business interruption exposure, those are significant cost drivers for any insurance claim that we're seeing that involves ransom or extortion these days.
Yeah, so your first party coverages are really critical to be taking a close eye at and making sure that you understand different various limits that get notched into your first party coverages. To Dan's point, business insurance, business interruption, even contingent business interruption can be afforded in cyber.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, but spot on with the industries that we typically see that are facing difficulty in the market, and that speaks to the claims aspect, right? That's where the claims are arising. That's where the significant dollars are. That's why the increased scrutiny and tougher to get coverage.
Great question.
Great. Yeah, great question. Michael, this question is directed towards you. What are the two most important cybersecurity initiatives you should implement to protect your company?
Yeah, so outside of MFA, which we've spoken about, I think I know the two are continuous phishing training, cybersecurity awareness training for employees, still number one, but it needs to be ongoing training. It can't be a project or point in time. It needs to be a continuous program, ongoing program. And then the other is what's called MDR, or 24/7 monitoring. And the reason for that is a lot of companies will implement policies and procedures around cybersecurity or compliance. They'll even have an incident response plan. They may have done an assessment or a penetration test, or have firewalls or antivirus or even MFA, a lot of these things we spoke about, but none of those things will tell you if a hacker is inside of your system right now or for 6 months stealing data, except for 24/7 monitoring. It's the only thing.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for that. Here's another question for probably Dan and Tony. What do carriers require of a company before buying cyber insurance?
Question. From my vantage point, I'll let Dan piggyback on top of it. Most carriers are requiring a completed ransomware application, multi-factor authentication, and fully implemented cybersecurity measures. Endpoint protection is important, although not completely critical to obtaining coverage. What else would you say, Dan, that stands out as a requirement?
Yeah, I would echo that. I would say really the MFA, the multi-factor authentication, is a hot button item. You're going to see that from virtually every carrier out there. And as I alluded to earlier, applied to various systems. So on the email service, on mission critical, on cloud deployments. We're also looking for an incident response plan that's been tested. We want to see backup frequency of data, and that those backups are stored securely offsite, segregated from a network, and that the backups have been tested. A lot of times we have seen claim scenarios where somebody indicated that they're backing up data, every week, every day. They go to institute a backup, and the backup has failed, or is encrypted as well, or is useless to them because it didn't back up a specific system.
Yeah, and the backup needs to be disconnected and segregated from the network, right? At least from what I'm seeing. I'm not sure if that's a requirement of Cowbell. I'd say some other additional things that we've seen is requirements of next generation antivirus, protection with endpoint detection
Mhm.
and response, email filtering solutions I'm seeing now, as well as MFA for privileged users' email, and then of course remote network access.
And then to Michael's point earlier, we really look at the cadence of patching software.
Mhm.
In this day and age, we continually see, a critical flaw within the Chrome browser that requires people to proactively push an update. This happened a couple of days ago, a security flaw. And when we're heavily reliant on large software suppliers and vendors out there, staying up to date with a patch cadence and making sure everything is done appropriately is really critical as new threat actors and new threat vectors are defined and uncovered, sort of these zero-day attacks. We need to be patching and aware of those things.
Great, thank you for that. We have another question here. What are acceptable cybersecurity measures that a company should consider?
I think we just hit on that, but again, it's the backup solutions, that are disconnected or segregated from the network, antivirus protection with endpoint detection, and then email filtering solutions as well as the MFA components are extremely important in terms of those cybersecurity measures that companies are asking questions around.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's important, because that's a great question. A lot of companies don't know where to go to understand that. So what we tell them is follow a framework, right? So I know Dan brought up earlier about, or Tony brought up about the NIST, framework. So what this is a cybersecurity compliance framework, and you can look it up online, NIST 800-171, or just look up, the NIST framework. And how we see it is, if you're not required today to meet a compliance standard, then you should look at 3. And it's really the CIS, top 18 controls, or CIS 20 controls. Then next up would be this NIST framework, which is a good, solid framework. If you follow that, do what they tell you, you're going to be in a pretty good spot. And then above that would be ISO 27001, a little bit heavier lift, a lot of controls, involved. But with that framework, you do get a certification, at the end, which some people like. But I would say follow a framework, probably one of those 3, and that will get you on a good path.
Good point.
Great. And then I think this is a great question to wrap things up, but is there anything a company should watch out for with upcoming cyber renewals?
Limits, coverage, watch out for ransomware, extortion sublimits, including co-insurance now. Social engineering callback requirements. I'm seeing cybercrime that excludes third-party funds that are escrowed, short periods of restorations, indemnity from business income and reputational harm is really important. So as Dan mentioned, your business interruption or your CBI, which is within your first party bucket, is important to be looking at. Also, what's important is considering your crime coverages. So you've got your first, you got your third, and you're going to have your crime coverages that are associated with the cyber policy. Those crime coverages will vary depending on carrier and what they cover. So make sure you're looking at that, and then make sure that your broker understands, the definitions in the insuring agreement with that carrier, and that you're seeing some kind of comparison as you're going through your buy over each carrier. So you've got your carriers, you've got coverage, and you're understanding by a comparison. So you're making a very educated decision on what you're buying. What is the cost? What are you getting for that cost? What are the levers that you can pull down on? Are the things that I would be advising any company as they're looking at an upcoming renewal or a new policy. Dan, what else could you share in terms of things to look out for in upcoming renewals? I think was what the question was.
No, I think you're spot on with that, Tony. There's going to be a lot of pressure on rate. There's going to be pressure on limits and pressure on retention, but making sure you've got a policy to address your needs. No two policies are really created equal. So having a broker that understands your business, what your needs are, and then a policy defined around those needs and those exposures is really going to be the most helpful thing.
And it's also getting in. It's time. It's time to buy the policy, because as the market continues to have pressure from a rating environment standpoint, as Dan was just alluding to, premiums go up. And as you have no experience in those rating environments are more challenging, the harder it is for you to obtain terms that could be within budget or are affordable first year out. Your first year out, you hope to do really well, and then you've got a baseline of experience for that carrier to pull back on and draw to as they're looking at your renewal each year, year after year.
Great, thank you all. Michael, Dan, and Tony, do you have any final comments before we wrap things up here?
Nothing from me other than thanks for the opportunity and the audience. Appreciate some people spending some time with us today.
Yeah, thank you very much for all of your time and your attention. Much appreciated.
We appreciate the questions. It was great.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you all so much. Thank you so much to our audience for joining us today. Please note that I will be following up with an email that includes the recording of this webinar along with the Cowbell ebook that will be included as an additional perk for all of you attendees today. Thank you to our speakers, Tony, Dan, and Michael, and their contact information was on that last slide. So if you need anything from them, please feel free to reach out, or you can reach out to me as well, and I will get you in touch with them. Thank you all so much and have a great rest of your day.